Good evening to the listening public. This is Corey McCray, PSTE. We're joined by our friends from Transportation and Environment, Chairman Corman. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge the senators that are on this video with us. We have Senator Sailing. We also have Senator Edwards, and we have Senator Peters. Mr. Chair, I'd just like to give you an opportunity to say a few words before we jump into the briefings, if you like. Perfect. At this moment, I'd like to call up our MDOT, Maryland Transit Administration, our fiscal analyst, our budget analyst, Steve McCullough.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Steve McCullough, Department of Legislative Services, here to present the Maryland Transit Administration budget. The fiscal 2020, a lot of feedback, maybe people could mute. Fiscal 2022 budget for MTA increases by 17.9% or 2 million or 2%. As with many of the things this year, COVID has a large impact on both the agency's operations and its revenues. I'm going to switch right into the prior year actions. In fiscal 2020, to close out fiscal 2020, MTA did use $260 million of the federal COVID relief funding available to help close the gap with revenues down in 2020. In fiscal 2021, there is a deficiency appropriations that will withdraw $43 million as part of the cost containment efforts for the agency to address this decrease in revenues. Exhibit 7 shows the overall agency spending, and you can see that bus operations account for just over half of the spending for the agencies. Turning to the proposed budget, as I indicated at the beginning, $17.9 million increase. This does assume and is based off of calculation with the base of 2021 being reduced by the $43 million in deficiency appropriations. Absent those deficiency appropriations reducing fiscal 2021, the 2022 total would actually be a decrease of $25.1 million. Looking at personnel, there is one increase of one position in the allowance. This represents the transfer in of a position from the Motor Vehicle Administration for a human resources position. Turning now to capital, this exhibit 9 shows the 6-year spending for capital, and pretty much mirroring other units within MDOT, the capital spending in the 6-year plan does decrease generally as the forecast progresses. The fiscal 2022 PAYGO allowance totals $620 million. I've highlighted a couple of the larger items. You can see the Metro rail car overhaul, the Purple Line spending, which is on its last couple years of spending in the program, and then system preservation and minor project funding is at $85 million in fiscal 2022. Jumping to the significant changes from last year's CTP, there was a zero emissions bus pilot project added for $5.9 million. This is a federal grant being received, and there are 3 new projects added to the development and evaluation program. In past years, the agency has had some criticism that they had nothing in the pipeline for transit. So this is a move in the direction to rectifying that situation. Turning now to the issues. The first issue is in relation to the operating budget. There is a mandated appropriation required by the Maryland Metro Transit and Funding Act of 2018. That legislation for 3 years did require operating increases of at least 4.4% over the prior year. However, the fiscal 2022 allowance as submitted is short by $67.1 million from that amount. DLS does note that the coronavirus and the pandemic have changed the landscape significantly since that mandate was imposed. However, that does not relieve agencies of complying with the law, and there is a method and process by which things like this can be addressed, and the appropriate manner for doing so would have been to fully fund the mandated amount and make a contingent reduction based on a BRFA provision, if that's indeed what the agency wanted to do. So we've asked the secretary to comment on why the agency did not meet the mandate and did not pursue a BRFA provision. Issue number 2 is the purple line. This was covered in the overview, so I'm not going to cover that again. Issue 3 relates to fare capping. Fare capping is a system that looks at a transit rider's usage of single ticket fares and keeps track of that. And when that person reaches the same amount of money that a pass of either a daily, a weekly, or monthly pass would cost, that rider is no longer charged for additional trips for the corresponding duration of that pass. There was a joint chairman's report 2 years ago that asked the agency to study the issue of fare capping and to provide this report that came out last October. Some of the major findings are shown here as bullets, and I've highlighted a few. One of them is that the existing fare collection system Maryland has in place does not have the capability of supporting a fare capping system. However, the agency is currently doing a procurement for a new electronic fare collection system that will be capable of supporting fare capping should that decision be made. The agency does note that enabling fare capping or having the support for fare capping does add $1 to $2 million to that procurement. And there is a potential, depending on how fare capping policy were to be implemented, for a material reduction in revenues. As I indicated, they are currently procuring a new system. We've asked the agency to comment on when that system might become operational and when and how it would pursue a fare capping policy once they do have that capability. The recommended actions for this agency are to concur with the governor's budgets for both the operating and capital. DLS does recommend a budget reconciliation and financing act amendment that would relieve the agency of the mandated increase if that is the will of the General Assembly. And that concludes my remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McCullough. Is there any questions for the budget analyst? Chair, I see none from the Senate or the House, so
Mr. Chairman.
Move on to the.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, can I just ask Steve a quick question?
Please.
So Steve, I just want to make sure I understand issue 1. There is a statutory mandate that was passed by the General Assembly, and in fact, that case signed by the governor at a very big signing ceremony that requires the budget submission to include a certain amount for MTA operating.
Correct.
And the budget that was submitted does not comply with that.
Correct.
And they didn't include a provision in the BRFA to address the failure to meet the mandate.
That's correct.
Okay, is there an M.AG opinion that says they don't have to meet the mandate?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, have they communicated to you any reason they think they don't have to meet the mandate?
The response that you will see in a minute from the agency was the same response I got when I asked the question, and that is that they believe they meet the spirit of the law, if not the letter.
Okay, so we govern by, okay. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. At this moment, I would like to call up the agency representative, the Honorable MDOT Secretary, and our Administrator, Kevin Quinn.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first apologize. I'm having a little bit of an issue today. So I'm mobile and I'm doing the best I can with kind of dealing with a family situation. But good afternoon, Chairman McCray, Chairman Corman. For the record, my name is Greg Slater, Secretary, Maryland Department of Transportation. It's an honor to be before you today to discuss the Maryland Transit Administration. This year has been a challenging year for the agency as we continue to deliver for our customers during a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. In Maryland, throughout the country, COVID has had a tremendous impact on transit. And while overall ridership is down, we are starting to see hope for the future. Over the past several weeks, we have been working with our Maryland Department of Health to vaccinate our frontline employees, and even today have begun to offer on-site clinics over at MTA. We sincerely appreciate the governor's leadership on that and support Acting Secretary Schrader in advancing more vaccines for us. It's been a tremendous help. As a result, we believe that we will be able to provide first shot vaccines to all of our MTA frontline employees who want it within the next month. In addition, 2020 was not a lost year for doing the hard work of laying out the vision for what transit will look like for the years to come. MTA completed work on the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan, the 25-year vision created by the collaboration of the public and regional stakeholders, and MTA quickly moved from planning to make those projects in the plan more of a reality and forming an implementation team. MTA also launched the statewide transit plan, an effort to look out 50 years and lay out a long-term framework to improve transit throughout the state. In my confirmation hearings, I'll note that I committed to re-looking at the capital program and the need to set the stage for the next generation in transit projects. This CTP reflects new investment in MTA's design and engineering program, going from $13 million in last year's budget to $46 million in this year's budget. The overall capital budget is increased by $125 million over the previous 6-year plan. This is part of my continued commitment to rebalance the transportation program and support a first-class transit system for the citizens of Maryland. These investments in transit infrastructure have a positive impact on service, safety, and efficiency, and greatly benefit the entire region. Right now, I'll turn it over to MTA Administrator Kevin Quinn to discuss some recent accomplishments, and then we will work back to address the questions and concerns.
Thank you. Administrator Quinn.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So good afternoon. I'm Kevin Quinn, Administrator of the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Transit Administration. As you know, MTA operates local bus, light rail, metro, and mobility paratransit in the Baltimore region, as well as commuter bus and MARC train statewide. In addition, as you probably know, we provide grant assistance to local jurisdictions across the state. We're the 12th largest transit agency in America, and in a normal year, we would provide nearly 100 million rides each year to the citizens of Maryland. In 2020, COVID presented us with a number of challenges, but I'm really proud of the work that was accomplished by our team, including some quick actions to ensure the safety of our employees and our riders, including disinfecting vehicles and facilities, power washing our stations and platforms, distribution of PPE, COVID-19 screening at our facilities, some bus modifications that we made, a dedicated safety hotline for our employees to address COVID-related concerns. And we even brought in a Johns Hopkins epidemiologist to talk to operators and mechanics and management on best practices in dealing with COVID. We have also been early advocates for vaccinations for frontline transit workers. I'm happy to report that this week we'll be announcing that 500 vaccines per week will be set aside and prioritized for transit workers. We began vaccinating our employees a few weeks ago, and today marks the first day of our on-site clinic with about 70 employees this morning being vaccinated on MTA property, and this effort will continue throughout the next few weeks. I would like to thank the Governor, the Maryland Department of Health, and Secretary Slater for really helping to make this happen for our frontline workers. From a ridership perspective, overall ridership is down about 60% as of early February. However, our bus system has retained strong ridership throughout COVID. Is down only about 48% today. Our long-haul commuter services have taken the largest hit with MARC and commuter bus down around 90%. I do want to highlight just a couple key capital projects driving the program. Progress is continuing on our metro fleet and train control system. That includes the procurement of 78 brand new state-of-the-art rail cars. Customers can expect to ride on those new vehicles as they enter revenue service in the year 2022. This is a big investment for us with a total cost exceeding $460 million. We continue to receive some overhauled light rail vehicles as well. We've got about 28 of those in service. We're about halfway done. That's a $160 million project. That's a real comprehensive overhaul of those cars, has a lot of upgrades for our passengers. On the facilities side, our Kirk Bus Division, an $80 million facility that replaces an old, outdated bus facility that will accommodate 175 buses and have 180,000 square feet of improved bus storage and support facilities. That entire facility has been designed undercover to address community concerns related to bus visibility, noise, and emissions. Operations there will begin this summer. And design is underway for our new Mark Riverside Maintenance Building. This is a $62 million facility that will supplement our existing main shop and includes a crane, a drop table, a wheel-true machine, and is a really, really big deal for us that allows us to become more independent from Amtrak, to do more work ourselves, and really takes us a few steps closer to being able to self-sustain the maintenance of our fleet. That'll be fully operational by June of 2023. But perhaps one of the biggest changes to MDOT-MTA in a generation, and one I'm really excited about, will be our transition to a zero-emission bus fleet, where we're focused on transitioning 50% of our fleet to zero-emission vehicle technology by the year 2030. We have funding for 2 pilots, a $2.6 million grant with FTA for 3 battery electric buses, another grant with Volkswagen for $3 million for 4 40-foot buses. Those vehicles will enter revenue service in the year 2022. Steve summed up the purple line quite well. I'm not going to go into that. We're continuing construction in the interim period. We're focused on progressing final design and utility relocations and remaining permit work in order to de-risk that project. In the meantime, working with our concessionaire PLTP, they're soliciting a new replacement design build contractor with an RFQ that was issued in January, an RFP that will be issued early March, and selection anticipated for June. We remain on schedule, and the Secretary and I absolutely remain committed to providing you and the public with regular updates on this project. I just want to close by noting that 2020 has been a pretty hard year for MTA and the MTA family. Our team has been on the front lines day after day through the current health crisis, providing a critical service to essential employees throughout the service area. And not only have our employees had to deal with really this daily stress of the pandemic, but also, as you know, the senseless killing of 2 of our operators. We owe our bus operators who are so courageous a great deal of gratitude. I want to convey that as an agency, we are focused more than ever on operator safety and how to best protect our frontline teammates. We've reflected a lot on what this past year has taught us, what's working well, where we need to improve, what the future of transit really looks like. We're evaluating our approach to things like equity, changing technology, stakeholder communication, really assessing the mobility needs of the region and how MTA can really best be prepared to support employers and employees as society and kind of the region really opens back up. At the end of the day, this is a team effort, and I can't say enough how impressed I am by all of our operators and mechanics, our rail operators, our frontline staff who are out there every day really trying to support and build the most reliable and efficient system possible for our riders. They are the true frontline heroes in this COVID-19 crisis. With that, I'm happy to turn this over to Greg to address the DLS analysts' issues and answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Quinn. First issue in the DLS analysis was that we were asked to address the MTA funding mandate. Chapters 351 and 352 of the 2018 established an increase in transit investment for both WMATA and for MTA. At the time the bill was passed, MTA's operating and capital budget for fiscal years 20 through 22 was about $4.22 billion. Chapter 351 increase, or 351 and 352 increased that total investment to $4.38 billion. Since that time, COVID-19 dramatically changed the landscape. At its lowest point, transit ridership was down nearly 80% from the same time the year before. Nearly a year later, the transit ridership across all modes is still down about 60%. Transit revenues are also down significantly. The current 6-year transportation revenue forecast is $1.6 billion, 8% lower than it was just a year ago. Despite these significant ridership and revenue declines, MTA funding for fiscal years 20 through 22 is $4.52 billion. This level of investment, we believe, not only meets but exceeds the requirements of the mandate. What we're finding through this is the greatest need for transit investment right now is on the capital side, trying to get to that backlog of state of good repair. With passenger levels on commuter bus and MARC still down approximately 90%, we feel it's best to use those funds to not increase that operating funding, but be ready for the increase in operating when that ridership starts to come back, and focus on the capital side to restore those services when they need it, but rather use those money on the unfunded capital needs. We believe that we've met the mandate in the most fiscally responsible way. We provided more than a total level of the funding required, but we put it to use where we felt it was most needed in the capital program, and did not feel the BRFA change was needed. For the next DLS issue on fare capping, I will turn it back over to Administrator Quinn.
Sure, just real briefly on this, as Steve noted, we have an active procurement in progress for our new electronic fare collection system, which will be capable of supporting fare capping policies. Our goal is to have that initial phase of that project launch in June of 2023 with the full system operational by 2025. The first phase of that project does include the capability for fare capping and supports the initial deployment of new bus and rail fare collection equipment, along with back office systems that support fare capping. Our team is going to be working to develop specific goals, costs, impacts, measurements, fare policy changes needed that would need to support this. We do that during the phase 1 development to support the phase 1 implementation. We need to look into a few things a little closer. As part of the new system, we've got to look at consideration of options to simplify the pass structure. So, when you look at a fare capping system, we've got so many modes. We've got bus, light rail, metro, you've got MARC, you've got commuter bus, and we've got to take a look at all those fare structures and how they would combine to a single fare capping policy. We need to take a look at some equity objectives that can be used to shape really the design of that program, looking at things like who is eligible for this, and taking a dive into also the fare collection and kind of the revenue impact analysis that Steve noted, really what are going to be the revenue and fiscal kind of impacts of this. But, again, our system will support fare capping with a projected launch in June of 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Quinn.
Thank you. I'm going to jump off. Deputy Secretary Powell is going to be on and kind of carry the load for me moving forward. I apologize for
No problem at all. I think that I say it on behalf of myself and the chair and the committee that we wish you well, whatever's going on. We understand.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Administrator Quinn, we're going to move on to the portion of questions, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
All right, perfect. I'm going to ask a couple questions. I'm going to leave the good ones for my fellow chair over there, Chairman Corman, but it is a couple that I have. So we know the CARES dollars had took place. We know that the MTA took the largest cuts in reference to modes of transit in reference to this past fiscal year. When the next CARES dollars come, do you all envision, or MDOT, MTA have a vision in reference to how that would come? Because we know that it should be landing, I guess, maybe mid-March. Speculating, but it's a very good high percentage speculation.
Jacqueline, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
Sure, happy to do so. Good afternoon, Jacqueline Hartman, Chief Financial Officer for the Maryland Department of Transportation. So as was mentioned in one of our MDOT's previous budget hearings, we are currently working on a supplemental budget that would bring in the second round of CARES Act for both MTA as well as the money that was received for the airport and for SHA. So we will be able to share that plan with you shortly and kind of walk through the overall plan. We're still kind of finalizing that at this point.
Got it. In reference to the capital needs, Administrator Quinn, we know that it was close to a $2 billion backlog. Could you tell us this last fiscal year whether we were able to put a dent or did that grow?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think we did make a dent in it of I think around, I think we went down to 1.9. I can get the exact number for you. I don't have that in front of me.
Okay, that would be perfect. The next one, according to Federal Transit Administration data in December 2020, the MTA Metro Subway ran 81% less revenue hours than it did in December 2019. The MTA Light Rail ran 88 fewer revenue hours than it did in December 2020. No service cuts officially announced, but how would you just explain, or could you just elaborate on the drastic reductions in the service provided?
What were the dates you provided? I'm sorry.
So when you look at December 2019, December 2020, when you look at the metro being 81% and the light rail being 88%, fuel revenue hours, according to the Federal Transit Administration data.
So I'm happy to look into that. I mean, I think this is the first time I'm hearing of that data. So a couple things. So one is on our metro side, I know that during that month we had significant metro work going on, track work going on, where you physically can't accommodate the same number of trains when you have to single track through an area that could have reduced, that did reduce, quite honestly, the number of trains that we had going on the system at that time. But if you could share that data with me, I'm happy to dive into sort of the maintenance that was going on at that time. I mean, I will also note that during COVID, we have no industry has really been immune to the effects of COVID, and that certainly goes for us and our transit employees and our frontline workers who are dealing with their own COVID situation or trying to take care of a family member. And so that has also had service impacts as we're trying to be as flexible and as compassionate as we can with our frontline employees.
Got it. Last question, then I'm gonna move on to my colleagues. There's an on-time performance. You look at page 7, Exhibit 3, in the DLS budget analysis that shows the Metro Subway had its best time on-time performance in 5 years, over 95% time. However, according to the Federal Transit Administration National Transit Database, the Metro Subway delivered far less service hours in March, April, May, and June of 2020 than it did the same months of 2019. 79% fewer less hours. So if the train isn't running because the operator is sick, or let's say that it's equipment failure, how does that get counted in reference to like on-time performance figures that's reported in Exhibit 3, page 7?
Sure. So the on-time performance, let me see if I can answer this correctly. So the on-time performance reflects trains that ran. It does not reflect trains that did not run.
Got it. I'm going to move on, and I'll double back in reference to a little bit further elaboration on that, but I'm going to move to Delegate Kittleman, then Senator Edwards.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's nice to see you, Administrator Quinn.
Good to see you.
Loretta told me that you all are doing much better than I had expressed when I last talked to the Secretary. I really am interested in knowing how things are compared with how they were when I was around, and I'm hoping that things have gotten better. The statistics don't show that, but it could be because you're in the process of making changes. How is paratransit doing?
Good. Paratransit is good. As you can see that our on-time performance is very close to the goal, while the DLS reports that Metro was the only service to meet that on-time performance goal. It's about a point below where it usually is. We recently transitioned to 2 service providers about a year or 2 ago, down from 3 providers. And so that was a little bumpy, but I think we've evened that out, and we've had some good operator hiring. And in general, I think that service is going pretty well. We're meeting our on-time performance targets.
Good. And I'm assuming all the buses have GPS in them now, right?
Yeah, that was a big one for us that we launched, was getting real time up on our entire bus fleet. We've also got that now on our entire commuter bus and MARC train. While that's not just great for our passengers on the external side, internally, we get to use that information for schedules that are actually based on real world data for the first time in MTA history.
Great. Paratransit was uniquely, they have different schedules every day, and we were just starting to get GPS back then. The union contract, I recollect as being very problematic. I wondered, have you been able to update it at all? Is it still the same thing? And how is it going with negotiating with the union?
Very good. I think, one of our kind of our biggest wins in collaboration with the union on the last contract was going from a 0% pension contribution up to a couple percent, and in the out years that'll now be 4%. And so the MTA is matching that as part of strengthening the pension for our union, our represented workers. But we have 3 unions. We have Local 1300 ATU. We have Local 2, which is OPEIU, and we have Local 1859 or MTA Police, which is AFSCME. We're actually in the process of finalizing that Local 1859 contract right now.
It's 1,300 that does all the bus drivers, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
And are the work rules better, or are they still a bit problematic?
They're still, some of them are still a little ancient. And
Yeah.
so, we have a big goal of our next go round in about a year and a half of updating that contract and really taking a deep dive and kind of modernizing that contract. I will say one of the big things that I'm sort of both excited about and a little scared of is as we look to this new zero emission bus fleet, we need to really transform the job description of our mechanics. So an A repairman that's defined in the collective bargaining agreement isn't necessarily turning wrenches anymore. A lot of times they're more like an IT technician with these brand new buses that are coming on than anything else. And so it's a very different skill set. And so that's something that we're actively working through with.
And do you have enough regular mechanics now?
So we do. I will say it is a struggle at times to bring in enough mechanics. We're seeing just a drop off in kind of those trades, but we are partnering with some nonprofits and some other groups to really try to feed that pipeline of mechanics into the system. We're also developing an apprenticeship program.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, to allow folks to come in real early and then kind of move their way up through the system.
Great. Just a couple more, Mr. Chairman. Light rail, when you get this new fare system, are you going to be able to, will light rail users actually have to pay to ride? That was always a big issue, and I don't know whether that's been cured.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Our intent is to maintain an off-board fare collection system. So we have ticket vending machines at all of our light rail stations now, and so the intent would be to update and replace those ticket vending machines.
But do they get on the train and they are not charged until they get off?
No, they have to purchase a ticket to get on the train, and then that is checked by a fare collection officer on the train.
Is that successful? Can they go from train to train like in the light rail?
No, I mean, you could get off and skip. I think I think what you're getting at is sort of fare evasion, and
the system seemed to be set up for that.
Sure. So I'll just say that we do regular surveys. I think our last fare evasion was around 2.6, 2.7% of passengers. Our MTA police keep very active, good statistics on this, and I think our fare evasion rates are among the lowest in the nation.
Well, that's good to hear.
Delegate Kilman.
Just one last question, and then I'll shut up. Capital versus operating. What I think concerned me the most was the record of not doing well in maintenance. And you talked a lot about the capital budget and building more things. And I always say, I'd like to see our house in order before we go about creating more. And I just would like you to comment on that, and then I'll be quiet.
So preventative maintenance is something that we track really regularly. So I have a monthly meeting with my folks where we go through preventative maintenance, whether it's bus preventative maintenance, the rail side, how are we keeping, what kind of condition are our tracks in, what have our recent inspections shown, and then we go through sort of a short-term as well as a long-term program. On the bus side, I'm kept up to date on all of our campaigns that we have
But do you have,
that emerge.
I'm sorry, do you have data that shows that you can actually compare maintenance records? I'm not sure how it would actually work, but is there a concrete objective way to measure the improvement?
Yeah, sure. So there's mean distance between failures is a common one that we look at. So what is the distance either in miles or service hours between failures of a vehicle or a rail car? And so we regularly evaluate that and see how we're doing. We break that down, not just as the overall fleet, but by division or by specific model year of the fleet. So we could say, hey, we've really got a problem with the 2010s. Let's really target those.
So what do they say, that data? Has there been improvement?
Yeah, I think so. On the rail side, I think our preventative maintenance program has led us to have, so sitting right here, we have 0 speed restrictions on our entire metro system for the first time in at least a decade. Actually, nobody can remember the last time we didn't have a speed restriction on the metro. We don't have that today, and I'd say it's in large part to a really strong preventative maintenance program that we've put in place.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Quinn, I'm not that familiar with Mark, but I do represent part of Washington County, and I can tell you over the years, it's been a big issue in the county, and my colleague, Senator Quarterman, is a big pusher of Mark.
Sure.
I think runs to Brunswick and then shoots over into West Virginia and Martinsburg. The question is, people from Washington County, local governments, city of Hagerstown, been talking for years, and I think actually starting to push a little harder about getting MARC train to Hagerstown, which would be very beneficial to Western Maryland. Have you all done any study on running? I know there's train tracks that go there. That's why it's called the Hub City. I don't know about the MARC lines, but I mean, they even run from there to Cumberland and on up to Oakland. So, ultimately 100 years down the road, you maybe connect all Western Maryland to MARC, but it would seem to me that wouldn't be that hard of a reach to get to Hagerstown, which would benefit the western part of the state. People want to travel, they could go to Hagerstown and get on the MARC train.
Sure.
Have you studied, or are you looking at the possibilities of getting MARC to Hagerstown?
So, so just a few comments on this real quick. So first, our MARC growth and investment plan and our MARC cornerstone plan that really take a look at the long-term needs of the line have primarily focused on the existing Brunswick line and the need to build third track, as well as some station improvements to increase capacity on the MARC line. So I can just say, historically, no. That said, we are undertaking, as the Secretary noted, a statewide transit plan that is taking a look at really pulling together all of the needs of the state. And I do know that this is one issue that's on their radar.
So it is on the thing to be looked at. Okay.
That's right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Administrator Quinn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take up too much time. I'll probably seek a Zoom meeting with you, Administrator Quinn, because we
Absolutely.
are constraints today. But quickly, what's the status of the monorail study?
I don't know. I'm not involved in the monorail study.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. I will seek that Zoom meeting with you. Okay.
Okay. Happy to coordinate that with the rest of the department.
Thank you, Chairman Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Deputy Secretary Powell is on the line here. I assume he has an update on the monorail study he can provide to the Subcommittee Vice Chair, Deputy Secretary.
Sorry, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. Sorry about that, chairs.
Yep, I know you're filling in, but we'd appreciate, the Vice Chair asked about the monorail update. I understand it's not the MTA, but it does have a lot of transit in there, which is sort of the key word here. So
yeah, Madam Vice Chair, I should be able to reach back out to you in a little while and get an answer on that. I believe that the study is complete. I have to figure out when we're going to post it online. So if you can bear with me, maybe by the end of the hearing, we have 3 hearings. So by the end of the hearing, I'll find out the exact date of when it's going to post. If you could just bear with me for, I guess, another half hour or so. Is that fair? Thank you, ma'am.
thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. Mr. Administrator, thank you for being here. Thanks to you and the Secretary and the Governor on the efforts to vaccinate the workforce and all you've done on the PPE issues for the workforce. I know you've had to move money around to make that work. I really appreciate it. I'm going to have a series of questions on the Purple Line, but I understand Purple Line Transit Partners is going to be testifying after you. So I'm going to save those for them and hope you can stay on because some of them will probably be more appropriate for you to answer, but I don't want to go through all of that twice. My first issue, which is also DLS's first issue, is I'm still very unclear on what you all think a mandate is and how they're supposed to work. Now, I appreciate that most of the mandates maybe don't target MDOT historically, other than maybe highway user revenue and dedicated funding for WMATA. But certainly, Your CFO has been around state government for a long time. You yourself been around state government for a long time. Secretary Slater sits in many cabinet meetings. So I'm just trying to understand what exactly is going on with this mandate. And if I'm missing something, if there's some confusion, is there a view that the mandate doesn't have to be, that the law doesn't have to be followed?
I don't believe that's the case. Jacqueline, perhaps you could speak to this.
Sure. So I think with this one, we certainly understand what funding mandates are. I think the difficulty of this particular mandate was given the dramatic revenue decline that came with COVID, as well as the dramatic decline in ridership, where providing an additional roughly $50 million in operating budget spending at a time when ridership is significantly down there was not a good use of that money on the operating budget side. It was really the real need is on the capital side, which is where we targeted the dollars.
Sure. The budget request that's before us now, when does that money start flowing? This budget hearing is about what fiscal year's budget?
Fiscal 22.
So when does that start?
When does fiscal 22 start?
Mm-hmm.
July 1st.
Okay, so we still have some time to make some adjustments. So if you have a question about whether a funding mandate should be shifted to capital, that's fair enough. Maybe it should be. I don't know the answer to that. You're the experts at the agency. But we have a way of handling that. It's called the BRFA. It's there almost every year. In fact, in my time in the legislature, I think the one year we didn't have it, there was a legislative version of the BRFA to make changes to funding formulas. Now, again, I appreciate that many of these mandates historically have not gone to MDOT, so maybe there's not as much familiarity as there should be. But I'm confident that Superintendent Salmon would also like to move money around outside of the mandates that are set in law. I'm confident that Secretary Kramer at the Department of Energy would love to move money around outside of the mandates required in law. The way they do that is to put in requests through the BRFA, and then the legislative branch gets to decide whether or not to go along. And I would say that the legislative leadership has been very cooperative over the years with MDOT and the other agencies when there's an actual need to shift things around. Gosh, my first year, the DBM needed permission to take money out of an account one day and put it back in the next day. We had to put that in the BRFA. So I guess I'm going to ask, is a supplemental coming down to meet the mandate?
Well, I mean, we have indicated that there's additional money that is coming through the second COVID relief fund through the CRISA Act, federal act, and that will bring additional money to MTA on both the operating and capital side.
Okay, if we're going to follow the technical letter of the law, Ms. Hartman, and not the spirit of the law, what is the difference between what is the letter of the law and what was put in the budget request? How many millions of dollars?
So I believe DLS's number is about $67 million. MDOT's number would be closer to about $50 million because the fiscal 21 appropriation, the working appropriation, is much lower than the legislative appropriation, which is being, part of what is being presented to you this session. So that does change what the number would be, whether we're working off the original legislative or the working appropriation.
Great. Well, we're waiting for that supplemental budget to come down with somewhere between $50 and $67 million. I'd ask you to send us over a list of recommended places that we reduce by $50 to $67 million to fence off that money to follow the statutory mandate for MTA operating. And if you'd like a different result, then I hope you'll come in with a suggested language for the BRFA to adjust the legislative statutory language. That is how this works. That is how it works for all of your colleagues in state government. And I appreciate that you don't like mandates. Frankly, I don't care. That is not up to you. That's up to the legislative branch. I've had mandate legislation that hasn't passed. I don't always get to have my mandates, but when they pass, and in this case, signed by the governor, I mean, this was not a bill where it was some partisan exercise, there was a veto override. This was a kumbaya piece of legislation. I am flabbergasted at the way you guys are treating this.
Understood. We will certainly reach back out to you and follow up with you so we can try to work through this, Delegate Corman.
Thank you. And I appreciate that it's a difficult time for everybody with the pandemic and particularly for transit. I know from firsthand experience that I am not using transit the way I did this time a year ago. So I understand there are a lot of pressures, but that doesn't mean you just get to do whatever you want. That's just not how this works. I'm sorry. Now, let me ask you another question on the capital side. which is how we calculate state of good repair. What is included in state of good repair from MTA's perspective?
Are you talking about kind of the backlog?
Yeah, so if I were to try to look at the budget, so in fact, Delegate Kittleman got at this a little bit also, making sure that we're sort of taking care of what we already have rather than doing new ribbon cuttings. As you know, I love new ribbon cuttings, but we also need to make sure that we have what we have maintained and working and operating, both for safety and for service. So when I look at the CTP, there's no state of good repair line item, I don't think. So what's included in state of good repair versus other capital?
So nearly everything in our budget is state of good repair. So everything except our D&E program is state of good repair. We do not have any huge expansion projects, as you're aware. Nearly all of our dollars are state of good repair. I do have Deputy Administrator Holly Arnold on the line as well, who oversees our asset management and state of good repair program. Holly, do you want to speak to this?
Sure, yeah. So getting into the specifics, when we look at the CTP, and this is how we calculated for the capital needs inventory, you can essentially take the total program, subtract out the D&E line item, subtract out the lots program. While many of those dollars are state of good repair, they're not MTA state of good repair. Subtract out the freight program, because that is an asset that we own and is, again, primarily state of good repair, but not considered part of the transit system. And then that will get you to the total state of good repair dollars. For the CTP, it averages about $420 million per year.
This is a suggestion. I'm not going to mandate it, but you might consider putting in the CTP a line item about the state of good repair, since it's been such a big issue, and you're working. Actually, it was both Delegate Kittleman and Senator McCray and I think about it, about chipping away at that backlog. It might be useful to be able to track that over time.
Yeah, it's a good point. I know that other TBUs have system preservation. That's not sort of a term we use, right? We use state of good repair, and so I hear you loud and clear.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, Mr. Administrator, I hope you'll stick around for the purple line folks for further discussion.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to call up Duran Basso from the Purple Line Transit Partners to give testimony.
Hello, Chairman McCray and Chairman Corman. As announced, I'm Doran Basso with Purple Line Transit Partners. Thank you for the invitation to today's meeting. We're pleased to be here to support our partners at MTA. On behalf of PLTP, I'd just like to say, can reconfirm our commitment to the Purple Line, to MTA, the communities the Purple Line is going to serve in the state of Maryland. So we're very pleased to be restarting this project. We're excited to procure a new design build contractor, and I believe our goals and processes are very aligned with the state of Maryland, and we're going to deliver this thing in the most timely, cost-effective manner we can. So I think the current status was covered earlier, and I'm here to support any questions that may be appropriate for PLTP.
Looks like there is a question. Chairman Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your continued commitment to the Purple Line. I'm glad that some kind of a settlement was reached, even though we don't know the full ramifications of it yet. I don't know if you've looked at the DLS analysis, no particular reason you should have. Exhibit 15 has a timeline for the replacement design build contractor solicitation. That's very important to those of us on this call, but for my constituents and other constituents in Montgomery and Prince George's County, what's really important is the timeline after that, which is the construction schedule and getting the Purple Line safely into revenue service. So can you provide an update on that timeline?
Sure. I think it's on everyone's mind, of course. It's on our mind. And we want to get it as soon as we can. And we're just very early in the procurement process right now. So it's difficult to tell without meaningfully engaging with prospective proposers to tell, what a reasonable and deliverable timeframe would be. But certainly we're looking at, if I had to guess, sometime 2024, early 2025 potentially is what we may be thinking, but we need to let the contracting community sort of put a little more thought and effort into that.
I appreciate at least being able to provide a tentative answer. One of the big issues for many of my colleagues who are further east than I am is the pedestrian access around the Purple Line. Now that's both a sort of a long-term issue of making sure there's good pedestrian pathways to the Purple Line, because as you know, it's not a park and ride system. It's a walk and ride, bike and ride, drop and ride, or kiss and ride system. But also during this construction, which it sounds like could be at least 4 more years, there's a lot of places that are blocked. There's not ADA access. And in some cases, there's many promises for maybe signalized crossings after the purple line opens and other things. University, Piney Branch are 2 examples. I mean, one, what are people supposed to be able to do in the intervening 4 years? And 2, a big issue of concern, and again, this is more my colleagues to the east than me, but that they've shared with me is that there's a lot of, it's not PLTP, it's MTA. It's not MTA, it's PEPCO. It's not PEPCO, it's WSSC. And when a constituent calls my colleague in Tacoma Park and says, I'm having a problem, who are they supposed to call to get the problem resolved?
That's a great question. We share the concern, of course, of pedestrian safety and generally safety throughout the corridor. I think that in general, a lot of the questions you answered are SHA or MTA controlled sort of designs and areas, but of course we are one team. We work together. We meet every day. So as questions come in, I think that are related to the Purple Line and that immediate area around it, they should come into the Purple Line community outreach hotline, and we'll tackle them as a team because they are definitely, it'll take a team effort to resolve them.
And is that community outreach hotline currently being staffed by MDOT and MTA?
In this interim period, it currently is. That's correct. And just to also clarify, in the interim period, it is also MTA with control of the project site.
Right. And so given the solicitation timeline, I mean, you hope to do close and end of solicitation mid-September 2021. What do you think the ramp up time is going to be to actually hand over control of the project? Obviously MTA, I know, retains overall control, but,
Right.
Control of the work site.
That's a great question. We unfortunately have experienced transitioning control of the work site from one organization to another because of what we've been through in the past. And I think we're going to use that actually to our advantage with the new design build contractor coming on. We'll look for ways to keep work ongoing, to maintain the schedule. And we're not going to it's not going to be pencils down for 3 months while someone new ramps up. The intent and the planning that's going on right now is very clearly to keep the things that MTA is doing, to keep the project moving, keep those subcontractors working, keep making progress while the new design build contractor comes up to speed.
Okay. So what was the groundbreaking, 4 years ago?
I think it was 2016 or 2017, yes.
Okay, and we're still on utility relocation. That's still something that's going on. So when do you expect utility relocation to be complete, which is often sort of an early stage?
It is often early stage, and MTA is advancing that work now. We think that the underground utilities could be potentially 80% of the way complete kind of this fall, and maybe fully complete this year, and overhead utilities are continuing. It's dependent on a lot of things, right away, utility agencies. It's a complex and crowded corridor, but I think MTA is prioritizing that work now, and we, in coordination, think it's a great decision to achieve the best end result for the schedule.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to my colleagues for your indulgence. I do have a couple more questions, or a few more questions, I should say. One, near my district, we have where the Purple Line meets the Red Line station at Bethesda. Some more blasting needs to be done to be able to punch through for the new Bethesda South entrance. That is work that was not planned before the departure of the previous contractor. So there are no plans done yet unless they've been done by the state in the past few months. So I'm curious if you have any insight into the timeline on when that blasting can be done so that they can continue work on the south entrance of Bethesda Metro Station.
Sure. My understanding is that MTA will not be undertaking that type of work. And so it'll be on the new contractor schedule. And certainly it'll be one of the first points of outreach, I'm sure, to that specific area as we start to prepare the planning for that blasting.
Yeah, I don't know if this is true, but it's been told to me that's the last blasting that needs to be done on the Purple Line. So it seems like, not low-hanging fruit, because blasting is obviously complicated, but it's the only type of that activity that needs to be done. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's what was shared with me.
That sounds correct.
Okay, there were many points of contention with the previous construction contractor. Obviously, the one that the state likes to talk about is the delays from the litigation. I'm a Purple Line supporter. I know you can't tell from this questioning, but I'm very excited to ride it, and I was very annoyed by the litigation as well. There were numerous other issues, though, that were brought up. and I'm curious how those are being dealt with. The first one, which is crash walls related to the freight railroad line. And let me just say, as I've said to Administrator Quinn and others many times, I do occasional legal work for CSX, the railroad in question, although not on this issue. I have no insight into it from that side of things, but I do always like to disclose that. How's the crash wall area of dispute being dealt with?
My understanding is that MTA is, I believe, advancing the designs, and it should be ready for the new design build contractor fully approved by CSX. That's certainly the intent, but I don't
So
know.
there's no longer any dispute. Crash walls have to be built and they're advancing. Mr. Administrator, did you want to chime in?
No, I was going to say that Doran's correct. Yes, that we are progressing design activities to get those remaining design approvals from CSX. And we're taking a look at other construction activities in that CSX corridor to reduce risk. But we do have in place the agreements and requirements to progress work on the CSX right of way.
Thank you. Another issue, speaking of right of way, is there seemed to be disputes over what right of way needed to be acquired, fights over certain strips. I think some of this might have had to do with the right of way you needed for construction as opposed to the ongoing operation of the Purple Line, but you can explain better than me. What is the status of that issue, which again was one of the things the construction contractor raised as a problem, excuse me, the departed construction contractor raised as a problem?
Sure. The right of way required for the project, as best we know it today, which is very well, having design nearly complete, is in construction halfway, is that we have access to all the right of way we need. That's another area that MTA continues to advance. If there are just little bits here and there, transferring from ease of right of entry to full takes or whatever is required. And just to answer probably the next question on MDE permits, the state is also advancing MDE permits. It's going fantastic. Very close coordination between the agencies within the state, of course, and the project. And we anticipate also having those secured well before the new design build contractor comes on board, and even the subsequent design with those permits in hand that we can now complete. So we really hope to, all those legacy issues are behind us. The new design build contractor will have a kind of a clean slate, and that's very important in terms of price, schedule, reliability, all the things we care about with this new procurement. And for the project going forward, it should be set up for success.
Yeah, they're behind you as the state is chomping away, spending that money, doing that work. So thank you to the administrator for taking that task on. And I think Mr. Pollock is the name of his project developer, who seems to be doing a fine job. Thank you again to my colleagues for your indulgence. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Look like Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you. Our chairperson asked the question that I was most interested in, which was how have the issues from the last contract been addressed. The only other thing I wanted to ask that I found surprising, this issue of blasting in the Bethesda area. Way back when this first was looked at, what we learned, and I'm talking 15 years ago, was that it would be difficult to build the Purple Line because of issues directly at the Bethesda, where the Bethesda, a station has to come. And I don't remember all of it, but it had to do with some being able to dig through, whether it was the CSX or what. But I just wanted to be assured that that issue, if you were aware of it, has actually been addressed and it's not still a sticking point.
As far as we know, I mean, the blasting in the Bethesda shaft area is fairly well advanced, although there may be some more to do. I'm not up to speed on the exact engineering status of the Bethesda shaft, but it was far advanced by the previous contractor without many issues. I'll say the tunneling on the project went very smoothly. It was a highlight. So I think those ground conditions in coordination with WMATA thus far have gone well, and we expect that to continue.
Could you maybe get back to me with just a check and be sure that that's not, there aren't any specific issues at that point?
Certainly, I can do that.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions from any members of the committee? Seeing none, I'd like to bring up our next additional testimony from Lauren Young, Disability Rights Maryland. Sure is Lauren Young with us?
I don't see that individual in the waiting room, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next, I would like to bring up Robin Buddish, Transit Choices.
I haven't seen that individual either.
Okay. Well, that looks like it ends the briefing on MDOT Maryland Transit Administration. I would like to move on to MDOT Maryland Aviation and bring up Budget Analyst Caleb Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bringing up the correct analysis. So for the Maryland Aviation Administration, the fiscal 2022 budget is projected to increase by 3.4 million or 1.8% for a total of 199.4 million. And that's on the operating side. On the PAYGO capital side, the fiscal 2022 budget is projected to decrease by 34.2 million or 42.1%. To a total of 47 million. Just quickly before I jump ahead to the remainder of the budget analysis, I wanted to quickly just go over this performance measure because here you see the dramatic decline between calendar 2019 and calendar 2020, and this is really due to the impact of COVID-19. You can see that this is projected to bounce back slightly in calendar 2021, so the current year, and then a little bit more in 2022, but still it's not returning to what we saw pre-COVID. So, and that's likely to impact the revenue numbers as well. Jumping ahead to the Exhibit 4 and the agency spending, you can see that 96% of the spending on the operating side goes to BWI Marshall, and then 4% goes to Martin State, and then another little bit goes to Regional Air Development. And this is consistent with previous years as well. Moving ahead to the budget changes to highlight a thing. So out of the 3.4 million, we have a 760,000 increase due to salaries and the annualization of the 2% COLA from January 1st of this year. And then down here in non-salaries, we have an increase in security services at BWI, and then also an increase in the payments to the Maryland Transportation Authority Police for security at BWI Marshall as well. And that brings you to your total down here, 3.4 million. Moving on to the special fund revenues and expenditures. The Maryland Aviation Administration earns revenue from both BWI Marshall and also Martin State Airport. And you can see that here for the 2020 actuals, the working 2021 and the 2022. I'd like to point out that while the 22, you having a net operating income in the 2021 working, this falls into a deficit and that's largely due to the decline because of COVID-19. Moving ahead to personnel, you can see there's a decrease in 2 positions in the operating side. An increase in 2 positions on the operating side and a decrease of 2 positions on the PAYGO side of them flipping positions. This is not unusual like the other transportation business units as well. Moving ahead to the PAYGO capital allowance. You can see here the 6-year CTP, and you can see that starting in fiscal 2022, there's going to be a gradual drawdown so that by the time you get to fiscal 2026, it's going to be well under the 50 million mark. And it's increasingly going to be system preservations here where you see no major projects virtually. Moving ahead to the 6-year, this is broken out by fund type instead of project type. And you can see here that the other funds, in this case, airport revenue bonds, in a large degree is going to constitute an increasingly large percentage of the capital program for the Aviation Administration. This is all the projects for the Aviation Administration. I just like to highlight here the really large one, which is the Concourse AB Connector project. This was mentioned last year during the budget hearings, and this is one of the projects that's really driving the push for the revenue bonds. Moving on to the first issue, which is the impact of COVID-19 on operations at BWI Marshall. MAA has waived a fixed rent and provided a 1-year extension to BWI Marshall's concession management company, FrauPoint, and subsequently all concession subtenants received fixed rent waivers and 2-year extensions. This fixed rent relief is has a fiscal impact on the state of roughly $16.4 million, which is offset by CARES Act funding. In addition, all the airport restaurants and retail operators were given flexibility during the pandemic to change their hours of operation, close operations, or delay opening. MAA has also restricted the number of access points to BWI Marshall and restricted the area to ticketed passengers in response to COVID. And there were also some actions taken regarding parking lots as well due to decreased traffic. We're asking that MIA comment on the impact of COVID-19 on airport operations and finances. This is particularly important because of all the transportation units, BWI Marshall has seen some of the most significant declines, as one would expect, due to air travel. And you can see here the blue being 2019 and the red being 2020, that was still seeing substantial deficits in the number of passengers well into the latter part of 2020. This is just Exhibit 11, shows you the difference in the operating revenue projections. The green is the 2020 session projection, and the blue is the current session projection. And you can see that the blue in both cases, but particularly in fiscal 2021, is down substantially over what we thought it would be pre-COVID. The second issue is the issuance of airport revenue-backed bonds. This issue was brought up last year. It was placed on hold due to the impacts of COVID-19. However, MAA is moving ahead with issuance of airport revenue bonds, both to refund existing types of bonds to consolidate debt, and also to issue additional bonds for the AV connector project. We're asking that MAA should comment on the issuance of these revenue bonds to refund existing debt and on the planned issuance to cover the AV connector project. And then with that, the last thing is with the actions, we concur with the governor's allowance for both the operating and pay-go.
Are there any questions for the budget analyst? Vice Chairwoman Krim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to talk about the cost per emplaned passenger, okay, the CPE chart. So I've been interested in this in the past because I thought maybe ours was a little low, but you're saying in this analysis that that has increased, correct?
Yeah, it has increased here. We were not able to get the information from DCA and Dulles and National, so we're not sure about the positioning of it in 2020.
Oh, because they may have also increased theirs too, you think?
Yeah, that's possible given the kind of general disruption to the aviation sector due to COVID-19.
Okay, so my question would be, like in the past, we had said, well, we really didn't want to have to do that because that may ruin our competitiveness. But I think my question is going to be after maybe next year is probably maybe a better time to ask this, is have we seen any changes in the amount of passengers we've had at BWI as compared to the other two airports?
Yeah, certainly. Actually, if you direct your attention to Exhibit 2, which is the market share here, we can actually see that BWI has actually improved its position in 2020 estimates slightly, a slight uptick here to a little over 40% at the expense of the other two, Reagan National and Dulles International.
So how much was that? How much did that account for in the budget? Do you know?
Oh,
revenue by increasing the CPE?
Oh, how much the CPE increased?
Yes.
It increased in fiscal 2020 from to 12.55, which is up from 9.33
per passenger, but you don't know how much total that computed too?
No, I can certainly get that information for you.
Okay, I'd like to have that, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Any more questions for our budget analyst, Caleb Weiss? Seeing none, we'll move on to the agency. I'd like to call up our Executive Director of the Maryland Aviation Administration, Ricky Smith.
Chairman, I will first see if Deputy Secretary Sean Powell is going to make the Secretary's remarks. If not, I will proceed with my remarks.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ricky. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. Yeah, first of all, a couple of housekeeping items. We do want to pass along our thanks to the committee for allowing Secretary Slater to slip out and take care of the family issue that he's going to be dealing with. He's fine. He's just dealing with some stuff at home, as it all does happen for us from time to time. And then Vice Chair Krim, to follow up on your question about the monorail, we anticipate the study, our goal is to put the study out next week. So what we will do is provide you the link to the study, you and the rest of the committee members, the link to the study. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't seen anything by the end of the week, certainly reach out to me and we'll see where things are, if that's helpful. And thank you for your indulgence for me to allow me to grab the exact time.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome, ma'am. And sorry, it took me a few minutes to get the answer for you, but I just wanted to be correct. Again, good afternoon, Chairman McCray, Chairman Corman, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Sean Powell, Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation. Joining me today is Executive Director Ricky Smith. It's a pleasure to be here before you today to discuss the Maryland Aviation Administration's budget. I would first like to thank our analyst, Mr. Caleb Weiss, for his thorough and fair review of our programs. I'm pleased to share with you the achievements of the MAA team. This year has been a challenge for the agency as we've continued to deliver for our customers during a pandemic. MAA's 500 team members and contractors never stopped working, adapted to health guidelines, and kept our state moving. BWI Marshall Airport continued to operate in a safe and secure manner throughout this continuing pandemic. They did what was needed to be done to make sure air travel continued in an uninterrupted basis for the traveling public and our airlines and vendor partners, focusing on ensuring a safe and COVID-free operating environment. MAA worked with our airline partners and vendor community to mitigate some of the worst financial impacts of the pandemic, revising contractual payment commitments, deferring scheduled rate increases, and increasing the level of communication to ensure all of our partners are well informed on any operational changes within the airport. In one measure of success, seat capacity for BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport as of February of this year was down 39% from the prior year, while comparative figures for Reagan National and Dulles are down 73% and 51% respectively, reflecting BWI Marshall's heavier reliance on the leisure travel market. The safety of all of our customers, the air traveling public, and airline and vendor community is MDOT's priority. And I thank the MAA team for their continued focus on this effort. Now I'm going to turn it over to Executive Director Ricky Smith, and he'll provide some additional details, and his team will be able to answer any of the questions you may have. So thank you again, Mr. Chairs and the committee members.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Secretary Powell, and good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present MDOT-MAA's 2021 budget request. My name is Ricky Smith, for the record, Executive Director of the MDOT Maryland Aviation Administration. I want to also thank Caleb Weiss for his excellent analysis of MAA's fiscal posture. As I've said in the past, we have a very collaborative relationship with Caleb. He's both probing and collaborative, so I appreciate all the work that he puts into our analysis. Needless to say, but 2020 was a challenging year at BWI Marshall Airport, but there were several bright spots that I'd like to highlight. Despite the sharp reduction in passenger traffic, BWI Marshall leads the region and handles more passengers than Reagan National and Dulles combined. And air cargo was a silver lining as well and continues to grow, primarily driven by Amazon's new 200,000 square foot facility at BWI Marshall. Earlier this month, MAA successfully issued $220 million in revenue bonds to refinance 2 outstanding bond issues. The issue was oversubscribed 5 times and received A and A1 ratings from Moody's and Fitch, respectively. Finally, in 2020, Airport Council International North America awarded BWI Marshall its prestigious Business Diversity Award, indicating MAA's strength and commitment to maximizing local and minority business participation, as well as diversity in employment. That's a recognition that we are very proud of. Going forward, we believe we are well positioned for recovery. Our two largest airline partners, Southwest
Mr.
Airlines.
Smith,
Yes.
only because we're short on time, if you can touch on the comments that DLS had brought up, and
I
then
will.
if the committee has any questions.
1 second on this last statement, and that's exactly where I'm going, Chair.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Both airlines have strong balance sheets, and they are recognized as two of the strongest airlines in the industry, and we are stronger because we have them as two primary tenants. As you stated, Chair, analyst Caleb did identify 4 issues that he asked that we respond to, and I will respond to those now. So the first one, he asked if MAA should comment on the status of CARES Act funds, what they were used for, and if any amount unspent. So in fiscal year 2020, MDOT received $87.7 million in CARES Act funding from the FAA. $60.8 million was used for operating expenses, $14.3 for debt service, and $12.6 for capital projects. An additional $2.4 million in CARES Act funding was received through the Maryland Department of Health for reimbursement for COVID-related expenses. The second question, the second item he asked that I comment on is how these funds will be used and if any of them have been spent. So with respect to the CARES Supplemental Act, MAA is set to receive approximately $24.2 million, including approximately $2.8 million for concessions operator relief. MAA recently received guidance from the FAA, which indicates a more restrictive use of these CARESA funds. So we're evaluating how to best apply the CARESA funds for debt service and operating expense reimbursement, and we'll have an answer for you as soon as possible after this hearing. In response to his third point, MAA should comment on the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on airport operations and finance. So back in March the 5th, when the governor issued a statewide state of emergency, we immediately pulled together the team to pull together a road to recovery plan to respond to the pandemic. It was a multi-discipline plan that covered the passenger's experience from the time you're at home making a decision to fly to the time you board an aircraft. And the plan certainly paved the way for our response. 5 work groups of MA professionals were assembled to innovate, research, and develop concepts and ideas to reach this goal. The work groups and areas of concentration were as follows: administration, which covered internal policies governing MA workforce, including safety, telework procedures, and workspace management. Second was business and finance, which covered cost recovery, budget management, concessions program, and airline relations. Category 3, capital and technology, which covered capital and technology improvements to address health, safety, social distancing, and requirements or guidelines from state and federal agencies related to the pandemic. Category 4 was communications, consistent messaging, marketing to both internal and external groups. And finally, operations, the improvement of a life safety areas, custodial enhancements, maintenance, security, and operational procedures. These strategies generated from the work groups were developed in 10 programs, campaigns, including programs to implement airport social distancing measures and enhanced terminal disinfection program and public relations campaign to improve the passenger's experience. Among some of the strategies that were most important and most impactful were enhanced custodial activity throughout the terminal, installation of sneeze guards throughout the terminal, upgrade to air handling and filtration systems, installation of social distancing signage, both fixed and electronic, closure of our parking surface lots, expanded bus service to both the daily garage and the employee parking lots, reduction of our hourly rate at $12 in our hourly garage to incentivize passengers to park in our hourly garage as opposed to our daily garage to reduce dependence on shuttle service. And then lastly, flexibility that we offer to our concessions operators and closing and operating hours. And the last item, number 4.
And if you could just summarize that, because the House has to get back over
Yeah.
Executive Director Smith.
Okay, so with respect to the bonds, as I stated earlier, MAA first revenue bond issuance was successful, and we're very happy with that. And we're now planning our efforts to do a new bond issuance to cover the cost of the AB Connector project. Chairman, that completes my remarks.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Chairman Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly before we start Q&A, colleagues from the House, the bells are going to ring any minute. I just confirmed with the Speaker's office we're still heading for 4 o'clock. So Ken doesn't know this yet, but surprise, we're going to reach out to Executive Director Doyle for a separate House conversation with him. I know Delegate Metzger in particular wanted a chance to get to know him, so we'll prevail upon Executive Director Doyle for a separate meeting just so everyone can have a chance to talk over the port issues outside of the budget hearing, but we'll let the Senate continue on with their work and then back to the Q&A on the airport. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Executive Director Smith, I just got 2 questions. If you could speak upon the inclusion of MBE partners with the master developer contract, and if you could talk about the base years that we're currently in and the option years that are going to be ahead of us. Pursuant to the contract language, just that they were encouraging such inclusion of an MBE equity partner.
So first, as I respond to that question, we do concur with all of the analyst recommendations. So the food and retail contract is covered by the FAA Airport Concessions Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, which is a federal program. When we developed the contract, we segmented it into 2 parts, the food side and the retail side. And I am happy to report we have an average participation goal of 48% on that contract. That's a combination of the 2. That leads the industry in participation, ACD participation on that program. As we prepare to issue a new RFP, it is our plan to establish an ACDBE goal that is at a minimum 48%, because we're very confident that the Maryland region can do better than 48%.
Got it. And just in reference to the COVID-19, there have been a number of labor unions, or the labor union have reached out in reference to the exclusion from participating in the labor force under the contract. Could you just speak to that, and what is the status, and are you having contact with the labor unions?
So we've been working very closely with labor unions. I try to be careful how I speak to that, because I don't want to violate any federal rules, but we have been communicating with labor unions to ensure that the new RFP does include language that does not disable collective bargaining with the new food and retail operators in our program. Currently, the program does have union representation. We have 2 operators that have Unite Here as an operator. We have 1 operator that has the Seafarers Union as an operator, and then the company that handles the janitorial services for the food and retail program is also unionized under a separate union. I believe it might be SEIU.
Okay, perfect, and thank you. I'd now like to move on to Delegate Kittleman.
Hi, I just wanted to take this moment to say hi to Ricky Smith. He and I worked together many moons ago. You were at MTA, weren't you?
No, I was at MTA.
Always at the airport.
I remember you well. We were also neighbors when I lived in Western Howard County.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. As we wrap up, and I don't see any more questions, Executive Director Smith, I just want to say thank you for your leadership, and thank you for everything that you're doing in reference to the airport. And I'll follow up with you offline in reference to the first question that I was talking about.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. At this moment, I'd like to move on to our next hearing from the Maryland Port Administration, and I'm going to bring up Budget Analyst Caleb Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to move through the Port Administration as quickly as I can. You can see here that the Port Administration fiscal 2022 operating budget increases by 0.9 million or 1.9%. Moving on to the PAYGO capital budget, the fiscal 2022 PAYGO budget increases by 5.3 million or 3.8%. Quickly before I move on to the rest of the budget, I just wanted to note here that you can see here the impacts of COVID-19 on the global supply chains and the cargo. So you are seeing a decrease in total foreign cargo handled and cargo value in 2020, calendar 2020, that is. Moving ahead to the budget. But the agency spending here in Exhibit 6, you can see that personnel and support expenses and contracts comprise the two largest chunks of agency spending at 38% and 40% respectively. For the increasing costs, the 0.9 million, you can see here we have turnover adjustments, reclassification salary increases being the largest personnel adjustments. And then down here, you can see increase in security service expenses, including the payments to the MDTA police, and increased janitorial services contracts is the other large increase in non-personnel expenses. Moving on to net operating revenue, you can see here that in the 2020 actuals, there still is they're in the positives, net operating income, not including the capital expenditures. However, in the 2021 working, you can see they fall into a deficiency, and that continues into fiscal 2022 as well. Moving ahead to personnel, there's three positions are being abolished on the operating side and moved to the PAYGO capital. This is not unusual for the transportation agencies, as we've discussed previously. For the 6-year PAYGO capital allowance, you can see here that starting in fiscal 2024 and continuing through fiscal 2026, you start to see a gradual decline in spending, and that mirrors what you're seeing in many of the other transportation business units as well. Moving on to the next page, which shows the breakout in funds. I'd like to draw your attention to the orange funds here, which are other funds. This is largely due to the Howard Street Tunnel project, where MPA is acting as a pass-through for funds going towards that project and CSX. Here you have the PAYGO capital allowance, and I'd like to draw your attention here to the Howard Street Tunnel project highlighted, and the infra grant is associated with that project. The other one project to note is just the dredge material placement and monitoring program here, and that's an ongoing, a large portion of what MPA does as well. Moving on to the first issue, which is the Howard Street Tunnel. And I'd like to draw your attention to Exhibit 13, which is the Howard Street Tunnel project by funding source. You can see in fiscal 2022, that includes GO bonds, the infra grant from the feds, MDTA funds, and then transportation trust funds. Then there's also other non-state ones, including money from CSX and Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. Exhibit 14 is the difference between the funding plan that was introduced at the beginning of last year's session here and the funding plan that's been introduced this year to fund the Howard Street Tunnel. And you can see the major difference is the increase in transportation trust funds in blue, and as well as the general funds and the Baltimore City highway user revenues, which were eliminated from the funding plan last year. And then the second issue is the impact of COVID-19 on MPA. You can see here that in the blue is the 2019 container counts, and the 2020 container counts are in the red. While MPA has not been hit as nearly as hard as many of the other transportation agencies by COVID-19, you are still seeing significant lag, particularly in the middle of the year in 2020 versus the prior year. And that shows up in the earned revenue that we discussed earlier. We're just asking that MPA comment on the lasting impact of COVID-19 on its operations and whether they believe that will have any long-term impacts on the economic health of the port due to shifts in global supply chains. For the actions, we can co with the governor on both the operating and PAYGO.
Thank you, Budget Analyst Caleb Weiss. Just want to see if there are any questions from any members of the committee. Deputy Director Sean Powell, I just want to acknowledge that I made a mistake and we missed 2 council people that wanted to touch on the MAA budget. If you could just touch base with Executive Director Smith, just to let him see if he can come back in case there are any questions for him. I'm going to proceed with this, finish this briefing right here, but then we're going to move back to those council members. If you could just let.
Sure, Mr. Chair, I'll reach out to him right now if you give me just a second.
I appreciate
we're
you.
up, right?
You are up. So at this moment, I'd like to bring up the Deputy Director Sean Powell, Executive Director William Doyle, and any agency folks that you need.
Okay, just one second. Let me finish my text to Mr. Smith. And I'll be ready to go. Thank you, sir.
Just entered the hearing again.
Pardon?
He's here. He's here.
Okay, great. Good. Thank you. Again, thank you, everyone. I see that the House has left us. So good afternoon, Chair McCray and the rest of the members of the committee. For the record, I'm Deputy Secretary Sean Powell of the Maryland Department of Transportation. With me this afternoon, I do have Bill Doyle, the Executive Director of the Maryland Port Administration. Again, a thank you to Caleb Weiss for his thorough and fair review of our programs. And I would like to take a second to thank our Chief Financial Officer, Jacqueline Hartman, for all the hard work that she's put into everything, and just acknowledge in front of the group and the committee that everything she does, she puts a lot of time, effort into it, and she's certainly well appreciated on our end. With that, the 6 state-owned marine terminals managed by the Maryland Port Administration finished a challenging 2020 in strong fashion, with key commodities showing significant gains in recent months since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, narrowing the gap in year-end totals. While the overall tonnage for the state-owned marine terminal was down compared to last year, the Port of Baltimore has remained a leader in Maryland's economic recovery and indicator of increased consumer demand. Maryland's port has played an integral role in maintaining our nation's supply chain, moving vital goods to the healthcare industry and consumers during this challenging time. The port has had some significant achievements in the last few months. The Howard Street Tunnel project is moving forward. The Maryland Port Administration and CSX just secured the Federal Railway Administration's approval for the environmental assessment. It's a 30-day public review and comment period that will begin on Monday and go through Tuesday, March the 30th. As the MPA and CSX distribute information for public review and comment, I invite any questions or comments from you, your staff, and your constituents. As you heard Chair Corman mention earlier, he would like to have conversations with Executive Director Doyle, so I'm sure that that'll be part of it. Last month, the Port of Baltimore set another record for container moves for a single ship. The new record of 6,000 container moves on the Maersk Edinburgh surpasses the previous high mark of 5,536 moves set this last August. The port continues to gain new business. Earlier this month, the first ship under the Port of Baltimore's new contract with the Metsä Group of Finland arrived. The new multi-year contract increases Metsä's footprint at the port and will bring hundreds of jobs and more than 370,000 tons of pulp and other forest products used to produce paper and packaging materials. For the 12th consecutive year, MPA's terminal received a top rating of excellent on a security assessment from the United States Coast Guard, further proof that the Port of Baltimore is not only one of the most productive ports in the United States, but also among the most secure. Now it's my pleasure to hand it over to Executive Director Bill Doyle to give you a few highlights from the port and address these issues and recommendations in the DLS analysis. And I believe this is his first budget hearing.
This is, and Executive Director Doyle, because we have your testimony, if you can kind of summarize with the comments, and then we'll see if there are any questions from the committee.
Yes, I will, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman McCray. Let the record reflect that I am Bill Doyle, Executive Director for the Maryland Port Administration. We had 2 DLS comments. The first one was MPA should comment on the status of the infra-grant agreement with the U.S. Department of Transportation. The Howard Street Tunnel project is moving forward. At 2:46 p.m., when this hearing started, we received the environmental assessment from the Federal Railroad Administration. My staff will be distributing information on how the public can access and comment on the environmental assessment. Following the comment period, the project team will respond to comments and assemble the final NEPA document. The Federal Railroad Administration is expected to approve the final NEPA document in the spring of 2021. MPA and the Federal Railroad Administration will then be able to sign the infra grant agreement, which MPA anticipates being fully executed by July 1st, 2021. Now, Mr. Chairman, the next comment that the DLS asked us to go over was MPA should comment on the lasting impact of COVID-19 on its operations, and if it believes that this will have a long-term impact on the economic health of the port. The COVID-19 pandemic had a significant impact on the entire maritime shipping industry. However, the Port of Baltimore's cargo numbers continue to rebound from low points in 2020, and the port remains a leader in Maryland's economic recovery. Despite a strong recovery in the second half of this year, the port's key commodities and public terminals were down in 2020. The damage was done early in the year. Our containers were down negative 3.7%. General cargo was down negative 6.4%. The roll-on, roll-off cargo was down 23.9%. Autos and light trucks were down 25.8%. However, in December of 2020, the port's state-owned marine terminal saw significant increases for autos and light trucks, general cargo, containers, and roll-on, roll-off of machinery compared to COVID-19 lows in May and June. Autos and light trucks from that low are up 288.88%. Roll-on, roll-off up 35.8%. General cargo up 29%, and containers up 11.9%. That was off the lows. The December 2020 figure for general cargo represents an 8% increase compared to December 2019, when there was no pandemic, and is the third consecutive month for year-over-year gains since the pandemic began. The figure for containers represents a 6% increase compared to December 2019, also the third consecutive month for growth. Roll-on, roll-off cargo was 1% above 2019. And let me say that, talking about how the impacts are with moving forward, the Port of Baltimore received 14 unscheduled container ships into the Port of Baltimore since mid-July, equating upwards of 20,000 TEU, which is 20-foot equivalent units. What we equate that to is congestion in other ports, and Baltimore becoming a relief valve for those ports and diverting those ships into the Port of Baltimore and getting those goods into the stream of commerce. And what Maryland has done over the past 10 years is remarkable. I've been to ports all over the country. The way that this port is set up with its e-commerce distribution centers, fulfillment centers, sorting centers, and with Trade Point Atlantic as an inland port, we are set for the future. I look forward to getting this Howard Street Tunnel completed and underway. Thank you very much. I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Executive Director Doyle. I just had one question. It looked like the funds were shifted out 1 year for Howard Street Tunnel. Would you be able to speak to how that affected, I guess, Pennsylvania DOT, CSX, in reference to the state's contribution that's going to be made?
Okay, I may need some help from Caleb Weiss on this. I'm not quite sure. I know that Pennsylvania is moving forward. They're part of the contribution fund, 22.5 million. And then I know that there was an adjustment, if this answers your question, that I wasn't here last year, but you had 5 funding sources last year. And then for fiscal year 2022, the way I understand it is that the state contributions were more or less rolled into the TDF for the bulk of the funding. If that answers what you're saying, sir.
I got it. Well, I guess it was supposed to be finalized in 2024. State shifted some of the funds to 2025 to finish out. I'll tie back in with you, Doyle, but just wanted to make sure that this doesn't hurt the relationship with CSX and Pennsylvania DOT. Is just all of them.
I can tell you that with the relationship with CSX, it's worked tremendously well. We have weekly calls through this entire environmental assessment. going forward. And funding stream, is there. The relationship's good. And we did have some discussions with Pennsylvania, and they're already, they're funneling the money out on their side too for the entire project. So I'll take questions from you at any time, sir.
Yes, sir. It looks like Senator Sailing, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank the port for the information. That's very important. As you know, part of the port is in my district. And I know down the port, they're doing some great work, and I want this to continue. I know also, and I'm very glad to see that Trade Point Atlantic is now working together with the port. They are doing RoRo and other movements down at the port, but I know they've been working with you, and I want that to continue, and it needs to continue so you both can grow. But I'd like to, I know Delegate Metzger, as we both are in the 6th District of Baltimore County, and it's, we share, I think, the same concerns that we like to, just to know a little bit more about what's going on. We know that COVID was a big issue this year and moving forward, but we want to know if there's any more concerns or anything that we can do to assist or to help out with the port. Also, with Trade Point, we're trying to work out other means of the transportation problem that we've had for years now with the trucking industry going from Trade Point and the port and port from Trade Point. So we're trying to work that out now. But I'd still like to have an opportunity to have maybe a Zoom or a meet with you and just talk with you and maybe the secretary and talk about maybe some of the issues that are important to you. And then maybe we can have that conversation later on. I appreciate that. And thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Seeing no further questions from the committee, this ends the briefing for Maryland Port Administration. Thank you, Executive Director Doyle, for your leadership. At this moment, I'm going to move back to the Maryland Aviation Administration. I want to apologize. I missed 2 people that were providing extra testimony, and I would like to bring up Deb Jung, Howard County Council Representative to BWI Roundtable.
Good afternoon, Chair McCray and members of the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee. My name is Deb Young, and I am the elected council member to Howard County's District 4. My district includes parts of Columbia that are impacted by incessant air traffic noise. My own home sits underneath a near constant barrage of arriving and departing flights, starting from pre-dawn and continuing until midnight, with just a few hours of respite in between. The stress and sleeplessness of this assault motivated me to take an active role in the BWI Roundtable, and I currently serve as its vice chair. I am here today to ask that as you review the transportation budget for the Maryland Aviation Administration, that you keep in mind the hundreds of thousands of Marylanders who are adversely affected by the superhighway in the sky created by next-gen enabled air traffic to and from the BWI airport, planes that fly too low, too loud, and too frequently. I would like to share with you the words from a resident who lives beneath this highway in the sky and wrote the following. This used to be a quiet and peaceful area that has been upended by the inundating and unrelenting noise brought to us by the concentration of flight paths and planes over our homes at all hours of the day and night. The current numbers of flights per day are around 250 and 290 when the airport is in Eastern operations, about 75% at the time. For those who do not live directly under this, it may not seem like a big deal, but for those of us who cannot escape the onslaught of planes, it is so much different. Some would say you are near an airport, get over it. I submit if it were moved over their homes, they would feel so much different. We did not choose to live under the superhighway in the sky, it came to us. Hopefully her words capture the helplessness that residents feel living under a major transportation route that invaded their homes without their knowledge or input. You might ask what the subcommittee can do to help us. 1, continue to staff MAA and consulting experts to work with the FAA, the BWI Roundtable, in order to find manageable mitigation options for the industry and the affected residents. 2, require MAA to report to this committee what they have done and what they propose to do to mitigate the harms that are being caused by these concentrated flight paths. And 3, keep an eye on the cargo expansion at BWI. The cargo planes are the most relentless, fly at all hours, and are the biggest carbon emitters. The more money that is put into cargo expansion, the more you exacerbate the noise pollution in the affected areas. Surely there is a way to mitigate economic expansion without sacrificing quality of life. I appreciate your time and efforts and hope that you are able to improve the daily lives of the residents who are living under this superhighway. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just one question, Madam Councilwoman. Did you, inside your testimony, you put the 3 requests that you had?
I can submit it. I didn't, but I certainly will.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and thank you, Chair McCray. I know what it's like being on a Zoom all day and having to get people in front of you. It is not easy, which is why I said I appreciate your time and your service. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councilwoman Xiong? At this moment, I'm going to move on to Chair Mary Reese, DC Metroplex BWI Community Roundtable.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll be very brief. My name is Mary Reese. I am a resident of Anne Arundel County and an appointed representative of District 30 to the BWI Roundtable and current chair of the organization. Today, I'm providing you with the Roundtable's 2020 annual report. I'm also providing the Roundtable's analysis and comment on the MAA's 2020 recertification of its noise abatement procedures required by COMAR. Please note this process has not been updated since it was passed into law in 1974. Noise abatement procedures are intended to protect Maryland residents from aviation transportation noise, but the noise contours developed by the law are no longer adequate. The contours simply do not provide information relevant to address the existing noise pollution and emissions from post-next-gen operations at BWI. In fact, very nearly every single one of the hundreds of thousands of noise complaints received by the MAA right now are from communities well outside of the current 65 DNL contour around BWI. Unfortunately, reflexive defenses used to dismiss noise and emissions concerns are just a minor inconvenience suffered by a minority of residents still echo in the halls of our airport authority. These sentiments are a drain on the time, talent, and vision we need for a better, sustainable airport. These sentiments stand in defiance to the evolution of mass transit to an ecologically and financially sustainable system. The airport can no longer be treated as an economic panacea that trumps all known costs to the communities and environment in which it must exist. When it comes to land use planning, the current law is obsolete. A public discussion over land use compatibility is overdue. To date, compatibility has been determined through the lens of the airport and aviation stakeholders as land use that does not threaten the interests of the airport. But now communities are rightfully demanding that compatibility actually require a form of mutuality between communities and airport stakeholders. It is no longer plausible for the MAA and other stakeholders to merely declare continued expansion of BWI operations as compatible with the community, citing regulatory noise abatement policy from the 1970s. And then I'll just say that I do believe that the land use compatibility that we need can be achieved through a comprehensive update of our noise abatement law and requirements for transparency and community airport reciprocity in future airport planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing no questions, I'd just like to say thank you for your testimony. I look forward to getting the written request, Ms. Xiong, so that we can follow up too. Thank you, Executive Director Smith, for joining us back. It's just wanted to make sure that you heard what was being said. Thank you. At this moment, I just want to thank Caleb Weiss, Steve McCullough, our budget analysts, all of the secretaries, all of the agency heads that joined us on behalf of myself, Senator Saling, Senator Peters, and Senator Edwards. We wanted to say, have a blessed Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee.